Forget the hero story. Forget the press conference. Look at what just happened through the eyes of a strategist, and you will see something very different from a triumph. April 5th, 2026. President Trump announced that the United States military pulled off, in his words, one of the most daring search and rescue operations in U.S. history. That sounds like a win. But let's break down what actually happened in the 36 hours before that announcement, because the world you woke up in today is not the same world you went to sleep in yesterday. The downing of the F-15E fighter jet marks the first time a U.S. fighter jet has been shot down in combat in over 20 years, according to retired Air Force Brigadier General Houston Cantwell. Think about that. For more than 2 decades, American aircraft flew over conflict zones almost untouched. And then, suddenly, inside Iranian territory, the system broke down. According to Tehran, the aircraft was shot down by Iran's new advanced air defense system. It was the first time during the war, and the first time since the invasion of Iraq in 2003, that a U.S. aircraft had been shot down. This is not just one lost plane. This is a signal to the entire world. There is no such thing as impenetrable. Now let's reconstruct what actually happened. Facts only. In order. On Friday, April 3rd, an American F-15 Eagle was shot down by enemy fire inside Iran. The 2 crew members managed to eject and landed in hostile enemy territory, triggering an urgent rescue operation. 1 crew member was rescued hours after the crash. The second pilot, believed to be a colonel-rank weapons system officer, had yet to be found. At least 1 Black Hawk helicopter was hit in the initial rescue attempt, but U.S. officials said it managed to stay airborne. Iran immediately launched a manhunt. Despite many in Iran calling for the immediate capture of the second downed crew member, with officials offering a reward to anyone who found and handed him over, he evaded being caught behind enemy lines for nearly 2 days. Hiding alone in a mountain crevice behind enemy lines, the injured American airman knew exactly what to do: survive and evade. For more than a day, the weapons systems officer whose F-15E Strike Eagle was shot down inside Iran avoided being captured by encroaching Iranian forces. At one point, he scaled the rugged terrain to a ridgeline 7,000 feet above sea level, equipped with little more than a pistol, a communication device, and a tracking beacon. While he was hiding, the CIA went to work. The CIA launched a deception campaign, spreading word inside Iran that U.S. forces had already found the airman and were moving him on the ground for exfiltration. While the deception operation was ongoing, the agency used its capabilities to track the crew member in a mountain crevice and shared his exact location with the Pentagon and the White House. Then came the rescue itself. It was into the high mountains that a team of American commandos, accompanied by U.S. aircraft dropping bombs to clear the area, swarmed to locate the officer and bring him to safety. The mission involved hundreds of American military and intelligence personnel, including Special Operations Forces and CIA operatives who mounted a deception campaign beforehand to throw off potential Iranian captors. But here is the detail almost nobody mentioned. The operation came with multiple twists, including a pair of damaged U.S. Special Operations aircraft that the U.S. had to blow up on the ground inside Iran during the operation. The downing of the F-15E, along with Iran's ability to strike another plane, an A-10 Warthog, and a U.S. helicopter assisting in the search and rescue mission, seemed to undercut the administration's claims of air dominance over Iran. An Israeli military official said Israel helped the U.S. with the rescue of the airmen by sharing intelligence and by halting Israeli strikes in the search area. So let's be honest, this was not a clean operation. This was a firefight, inside enemy territory, with aircraft destroyed on the ground, with an A-10 hit, with Black Hawks taking fire. The colonel survived, but the machine around him took serious damage. Now let's talk money, because this is where it hits you personally. The war in the Middle East is creating the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. With crude and oil product flows through the Strait of Hormuz plunging from around 20 million barrels per day before the war to a trickle currently, Gulf countries have cut total oil production by at least 10 million barrels per day. Brent crude oil prices surpassed $100 per barrel on March 8, 2026, for the first time in 4 years, rising to $126 per barrel at its peak. And Iran has already told the world what comes next. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it will not allow a single liter of oil through the Strait of Hormuz. An IRGC spokesperson said any vessel linked to the United States, Israel, or their allies will be considered a legitimate target. They then stated publicly, expect oil at $200 a barrel. The Gulf region produces nearly half of the world's urea and 30% of ammonia, with about 1/3 of the world's fertilizer passing through the strait. Urea prices increased by 50% since the start of the war as of late March 2026. The price shock and the shortage of fertilizer during the spring planting season could reduce the planting and yields of corn in the United States, the main feedstock for U.S. beef, poultry, and dairy, and potentially increase global food prices into 2027. These factors will cascade through global supply chains, raising consumer prices across the board in about a month. We are entering a period of higher inflation and reduced manufacturing. Now here is where your mortgage becomes part of this war. The yield on the 10-year Treasury note has risen by roughly half a point over the course of the war to 4.4%, reflecting worries about inflation and the prospect that the Federal Reserve may not cut interest rates as it had hoped. Bloomberg Economics' big data price tracker put U.S. CPI for March at 3.4% year-on-year, a marked increase from 2.4% in February, with rising fuel prices as the main culprit. The EU estimates gas prices have risen 70% and oil by 50%, resulting in an extra €13 billion bill on fossil fuel imports. That bomb fell far away. The shrapnel just landed in your bank account. Now let's look at who is already building their backup plans, because the smart players never wait for the outcome. They position themselves before it arrives. Israel is now focusing on targeting Iran's steel and petrochemical industries, which are critical for Iran's economy and military. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel's military strikes have destroyed the majority of Iran's capabilities to manufacture steel. And on Saturday, Israel said it bombed a petrochemical complex needed for manufacturing missiles. Russia is playing it quietly. Russia says it is continuing to evacuate its staff from Iran's lone operational nuclear power plant amid ongoing U.S.-Israeli attacks. The latest exit comes as Tehran said its nuclear facility had come under attack, killing an Iranian security guard. The head of Russia's nuclear energy agency, Rosatom, said nearly 200 Russian workers departed the Bushehr nuclear facility by bus minutes before the plant was hit. No statements, no threats, just quietly pulling their people out. That is what strategic distance looks like. They are keeping their cards. Iran, meanwhile, is fighting in the information space. Iranian state media is doing its best to undercut a triumphant moment for Trump, with outlets flat out denying that the U.S. had rescued its missing service member. When you cannot win in the air, you fight in the narrative. That is Tehran's last line of deterrence. Now, the most important part of this video, what happens next? 3 scenarios. Listen carefully. Scenario 1, the deal in 48 hours. Probability, 20%. Trump threatened to unleash all hell on Iran as early as Monday, saying the 10-day deadline for the country to make a peace deal with the U.S. was running out. Iran opens the strait. Negotiations begin. Oil falls. The Fed cuts rates. Your mortgage gets cheaper. Markets rally. But here's the problem. Tehran has never publicly capitulated. They need any deal to look like a victory for their domestic audience. That is a very narrow corridor for any agreement. Scenario 2, the frozen war. Probability, 55%. Iran keeps the strait partially closed. Strikes continue on both sides. Oil prices are likely to remain elevated even if the U.S. moves quickly to start pulling its forces out of the region. As one analyst put it, there is no going back to pre-war normal, pointing to the higher geopolitical and financial risks around trade in the Gulf. Inflation stays high. The Fed stays frozen. Your cost of living does not go down. This is the new normal of a war without a winner. Scenario 3, the spiral. Probability, 25%. If the Strait of Hormuz stays closed too far into the second quarter, oil prices could move sharply higher. At $170 a barrel, the impact on inflation and growth roughly doubles. A stagflationary shock that could shift everything, from the path ahead for central banks to the outcome of the U.S. midterm elections. Oxford Economics modeled a scenario where global oil prices average $140 a barrel for 2 months. That, they find, would be enough to push the Eurozone, the UK, and Japan into economic contraction and create an economic standstill in the United States. And do not forget, there is a damaged nuclear reactor in Bushehr, from which Russian specialists have already evacuated. Nobody wants to say that name out loud, but it is sitting on the table. The US and Iran were racing to find the American airman for about 2 days, while the American-Israeli war on Iran entered its 37th day. One colonel in a mountain crevice, 7 hours of operations over hostile territory, dozens of aircraft, transport planes destroyed on the ground, a CIA deception campaign, an A-10 hit over Kuwait, an Iranian state television channel screaming victory, and a global energy system on the edge of its worst crisis since the 1970s. The successful rescue marks a clear success for the U.S. president at a time when he is under mounting pressure to end a war which has choked global energy supplies and sparked fears of further escalation. But while politicians count points, you are counting money. At the gas pump, on your electricity bill, in the notification from your bank. This bomb landed far away. The shrapnel is already in your wallet. The only question now is how deep it goes.